Hey, I'm super thrilled to be welcoming Nicola Dinan to my page today. People who follow me for a while probably know that I'm a really big fan of her books. And if you don't know what she's written Bellies, her first novel, and also she's the author of Disappoint Me, which I've got a gorgeous little sneaky proof here, which is coming out soon. And this one I just thought was amazing. And Nicola, I think you write such like brilliantly nuanced characters, and you really kind of get to the heart of these kind of complicated people. I think it's something that
Thank
I
you.
really admire in your work. Yeah, so I really, really enjoyed this, and I can't wait for people to read it. So I suppose,
Thanks.
like, how was writing disappoint me? Like, how did you find writing it?
Hard. I think, I wrote Bellies with so much energy. I partly ascribe it to the fact that I was working a job I didn't like at the time, and I saw Bellies as my ticket out of it. Even if it was a far-fetched dream, I was like, this is my way of being able to do things that I actually enjoy in life rather than being stuck working as a lawyer on jobs that I didn't really care for or felt matched my sense of morality. And I approached it with almost kind of this youthful energy, which I think is kind of really present in the book, the way that the characters and Bellies are really charging at life.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time I started putting pen to paper with Disappoint Me, I think the potential for making a career as a writer felt a lot more real. And I had kind of lost that energy, not in a bad way. I just think it's a kind of a necessary consequence of writing a first book and starting another.
Yeah.
But I was writing it with so much more awareness of my weaknesses as a writer. And, that's on a very technical level, just even, words I find myself repeating, metaphors that I often use to clog up and finding that they clog up sentences. And it meant that the process was a little bit more self-critical
Mm.
and definitely difficult. But then there's a bigger point, which is that I was writing and editing with the weight of expectation on me. I was writing a lot of Disappoint Me in the lead up to Bellies
Mm.
or rather the publication of Bellies. And so I was consumed with these thoughts of, what if Bellies doesn't work out? What if I'm going to be a failure? And that creates a difficult environment to write in. But I found the way to work through those feelings was actually to write them out in the book. And so we meet Max at the start of the book. She's published a book of poetry that hasn't gone as well as she hoped, and she's struggling to find her route to rediscovering why it is she likes writing to begin with. And that was definitely something I was experiencing whilst I was writing Disappoint Me and waiting for Bellies to be published. And, it made writing Disappoint Me hard, but also so much more rewarding because I was working out these quite complex feelings at the same time Max was.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting because I feel like I loved Belly so much, but it feels like Disappoint Me is a lot more sort of mature in a way, and I feel like that must have been like a really hard thing for you to do, to go into a book kind of aware of your weaknesses and be like, okay, this is what we're not going to do, and also like refine your craft. And I feel like it really shows in Disappoint Me. I guess
Oh,
one of the questions as well is
thank
like you
you.
kind of said, it seemed like similar to you, but I noticed that she's a poet, but then she also works in for a tech company, and I'm like, these are two like really different jobs. Like, was that like an intentional choice for her kind of career for you?
I think I was, well, I refer to the sort of Max's job as sort of the more grueling modern form of artistic patronage in the book, where, people spend their lives fronting as artists but have to do these jobs they really hate
Yeah.
in order to make that art work. And what's so funny about her legal job, where she basically impersonates an AI and reviews contracts whilst pretending to be a robot, signing off emails as the robot. It sounds so strange, but it's probably the part of the book which most accurately is lifted
Yeah.
from my own life, in that I did that exact job,
Wow. Wow.
which I think often really surprises people. And I think it's really lifted from that experience of, working, just feeling existing in two worlds at once. And, pretending to be a robot on the one hand and then participating in an art form which at its core is, uh, you know, inextractably human. And it wasn't so much written with a sense of a intention to represent sort of, the duality of man or whatever, but much more just a funny anecdote
Yeah.
from my own life that I was able to inject into the prose. And I really value whenever I'm able to do that in my writing, lift things from my own personal life, which I can put into the prose to give it a greater sense of reality. And I think as writers, and I've certainly found this with with the publication of Bellies, there's often a quite rightly instinct to put up a good amount of distance between the author of fiction and the work of fiction. And even though when there are quite traceable elements, and I also can understand that for a lot of writers that assumption of auto fiction is really frustrating.
Mm.
But I think now that I'm publishing a second book and having experienced having published one already, I kind of know that those associations between me and those characters in the first book aren't always a bad thing. And actually, the things that people often compliment in the book are the things which I've lifted from real life or are heavily inspired by real life. And I've sort of embraced that it helps to ground a work more strongly in
Mm.
reality
Yeah,
and feel a bit more, yeah, current and fresh.
yeah, that really resonates. I feel like because it kind of just makes the text like more sort of authentic in a way. And I feel like with books and people writing fiction, not the whole book is not going to be their own lives, but of course, I feel like even subconsciously you're going to take tidbits from your life. Like we've all lived these like long and amazing lives, and we've gone through loads of different funny things. That why would you not want to inject your kind of work with that and make it even stronger?
Yeah, and it's such a good way to anchor a book in a specific point in time as well. Like I had so much fun writing Vincent's chapters in 2012. Because what a time, what a time to be alive. And, thinking about what it was like to go to clubs in 2012, when I was 18 and sort of chart that experience through those chapters. And of course, Vincent's chapters are sort of filled with this like anxious foreboding, which to be honest, I also really heavily associate with being 18.
Yeah.
But it situating it within that place made it a really wonderful experience to write, particularly in contrast with, Max's sections, which are in
Yeah,
2023.
yeah, true. Yeah. Um, cool. And one of the things in Disappointment, which I feel like was also found in Bellies, is that your sense of place in writing is so strong, and it kind of seems to me like that's a really important part of your work. Like obviously, first with Bellies, and then with Disappoint Me, it's set a lot of it is in East London, and then also some of it's in Bangkok. Like, is that like a really important part of your writing process? Do you feel like you gravitate towards place as a sort of because place in your books are almost like characters? I would say, they're really strong and they're really present. I think.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a kind thing to say. And I think for me, I can't ever imagine writing one of those books without a place.
Mm-hmm.
You know how, not to say I don't enjoy them, I do, but some authors prefer to sort of leave cultural artifacts or places unnamed in their writing. And I mean, to an extent, I was guilty of that in Bellies because I didn't name the university town, but which Tom and Ming meet in. But I felt it was very obviously Cambridge or a university like that, and I didn't think the world needed another a book set in Cambridge so explicitly. Otherwise, I find
Strong point.
a huge, a really strong desire to anchor books and things that I write in a certain place and time. I think it's not 2012, for example, is not the same in every country, and it almost be quite uh, culturally blind to assume that place doesn't matter as much as time does. And I also want to create a sense of familiarity. I think, for those of us who live in London, for example, who read books in London, it's always it's another means through which we can connect to the book.
Yeah.
And likewise, when I wrote Bellies and had chapter set in Malaysia and had being from Malaysia, I've had such a warm response to from a large number of Malaysians, and I grew up in Malaysia, about being able to connect to being able to see a book written by a Malaysian that's partially set in Malaysia. And so in Disappoint Me, I didn't want to stray from that goal too far. And I wanted the places to feel very real. I've been to all of the places that I write about, which I think is really important in crafting a sense of, yeah, realism with respect to those places. But I think it just offers more points of connection between the reader and the work. And that's not to say if someone hasn't been to Bangkok or isn't familiar with Hong Kong, which is referenced quite a lot throughout the novel, that they're not going to be able to connect to it. But I'm always wowed when I talk to readers about the myriad ways at which they find connection to a piece of work.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think like both are equally great, but I think your style and kind of making those connections to deepen the readership, I think it's really important. And you look at like kind of classic books. Like I just finished reading White Teeth by Sadie Smith, and that's so
Yeah,
so like connected to London, and you get such a sense of like this authentic city at a time, like 20 years ago, whenever it was, and then also NW, like these will be remembered for being so like kind of classic. So I think kind of Bellies and Disappoint Me are so good in that way because, as you said, yeah, they're just going to be so connected to readers because of these like specific sort of examples and time capsules almost, you know?
yeah, thank you. But I think it's also a huge source of humor as well. Like I think I write a lot about East London, but not in a particularly romantic way. If
Oh, there
anything,
was some cheeky bits in there, and I was like, I love this.
I would say, I took it as an opportunity to make fun of a
Yeah,
lot of people in East London. There's a moment where Max is at a book launch at a venue in Shoreditch, and she's looking out into the crowd, and she's like, the hairstyles are a mixture of he, they yellow and she, they mullets. And I'm like, I just want to be able to, not only embrace the time that we live in, but use it as a source of humor and to lighten the novel,
like,
because I think when things remain nameless and without place and without time, there's I think treating place and time with a level of specificity just helps introduce some kind of levity into the book. Like it feels lighter and it feels, you move through it a bit quicker, and or at least I find when I'm writing that's how it feels. And I think Disappoint Me deals with some pretty dark things. There are some pretty horrible things that occur in the novel, some of which are done by some characters to the others. And I think in that sense, there are ways in which it's almost darker than Bellies. And I don't think I could write things like that if I didn't take whatever opportunities I had to introduce some kind of levity.
yeah, yeah, to kind of poke fun and kind of have that balance. Yeah,
Yeah, to have like some lightheartedness alongside the
yeah,
heavy-heartedness.
exactly. Cool. So like we've just come out of 2024, and I'm sure that was a massive year for you. I was kind of interested, like, what was one of your sort of um, career highlights over the year?
I think towards the end of the year, I found out that I won the Polari First Book
Yeah,
Prize,
congrats.
which was, I mean, it was so incredible. And, what's so sad is that, well, I say sad, but, it was, I was in Denmark for a literary festival, which was like, I was like, this is so
Yeah,
cool. And then the only downside to being in Denmark was that I missed the Polari prize giving ceremony, and I was like, it's gonna be fine. I'm not gonna win. And then I get a text from my editor being like, "You won." I was like, "Oh, I wish I was there."
yeah, yeah,
And so I celebrate it by getting like a Magnum to my hotel room and eating it in bed. But I think, I that was absolutely, I think, the highlight. It feels really special. I mean, validation is such a funny thing because you work so hard to immunize yourself against the want for validation, and you're like, I don't need it. Validation comes from within. And then you win a prize and you're like, oh my God, I love validation, validate me
I
more.
need them more. Yeah,
But it was a really wonderful way to close out the year. But I think the last 18 months since Bellies has been published has just been so phenomenal and life changing. And I feel like I've barely recovered. And I'm now doing interviews for book two and getting ready for the
Brilliant.
release of book
Excellent.
two. Yeah, and so it feels like I've just been on this like really fast train around the world and only having just enough time to sort of look out the window and take the views in.
Yeah.
But it's hard to pin it's hard to sort of just pick one thing, which has been great. But that was just such a nice way to close out the year.
Yeah, for sure. Congrats again. Um, so yeah, I
Thank
wonder
you.
who are like some of your writing influences? Like, who do you feel inspired by when you're writing? Do you have anybody in particular?
I find that such a difficult question because I'm always so cautious about expressing who I consider to be influencers because I'm worried that people will see that and be like, how dare she say that she and there's a sense of which I'm like, I don't think I write like anyone who I consider to be influencers, but I definitely find writers who influence my thinking and who definitely have nurtured the way that I consider, what's possible when we tell stories, what kind of stories are even possible to write. And one of those is definitely James Baldwin. I always say Another Country is, one of my top five novels of all time. I just think it's so beautiful and prescient and so lyrical yet emotionally precise, which I think are two things which are hard to hold in one's hands at the same time. But other influences, Jennifer Egan,
Okay,
I love. I'd say
not
A
heard
Visit
of her.
from a Goon Squad is another one of my top
Okay,
five
okay. I'm
novels.
adding that straight to the TBR. Yeah.
Oh, it's
I was literally just
amazing.
talking
It's
to
just
somebody about it, recommending it like 2 or 3 days ago. So I'm like, okay, I'm taking this as a sign now.
you have to read it, Ross. It's incredible. And I also love Rachel Cusk. I just think she's fantastic. And I just think she's one of the smartest writers around. And I don't return to a lot of writing. I have so many friends, come across so many people who have been like, oh, I've reread Bellies, for example. And it's like, I don't even reread Bellies.
Yeah.
Like, I can't, I don't seem to be able to reread books.
Interesting. Yeah.
Although my New Year's resolution in 2025 is to reread 10 books, and I'm actually staring at the 10 right now.
Oh, have you
But
done them?
yeah, I have
Oh,
actually.
what's
But
one?
it's A Visit from the Goon Squad, some Joan Didion in there, Banana Yoshimoto.
Okay, yes.
But yeah, in terms of other influences as well, I think I am trying to turn my eyes towards writing like a larger, sprawling novel.
Okay.
Um, and so I need to read Middlemarch. I've needed to read Middlemarch for like 20 years. I think everyone always says you have to read Middlemarch, and so I'm planning to read Middlemarch, and hopefully that will be an inspiration.
Yeah.
But Minjin Lee as well at the moment, I'm thinking a lot about her work, not only Pachinko, but perhaps maybe a lesser known novel called Free Food for Millionaires,
Okay. I've
which
never heard
I
of
think
that
was
one.
released in 2006, 2007. But I just thought it was such a phenomenally ambitious debut from her. And I love, and she's sort of famously inspired by Middlemarch. And so
Right. Okay.
I'm, yeah, so at the moment, I'm really thinking about kind of trying to look at sort of a bigger project than what I've done in Bellies and Disappoint Me, and a third novel which I've written as I look towards a fourth with sort of a bigger cast of characters, sprawling a larger period of time. The Bee Sting is another good example
Yeah.
of a novel which I'm feeling very inspired by at the moment.
Have you
And
read
so I find, oh,
Homegoing by Ya Gassi?
should I read that?
So good. Yeah, it's like starts off
Okay,
with
that's on the
Middlemarch,
list.
and then it follows their whole kind of family lineage from like the 1800s slavery America up till like the 20th century or 21st century. So so good. Yeah, if you like
Okay,
big cast of
I'm
like
adding
sprawling characters.
I'm gonna write that down as soon as we
Mm,
finish. I'm looking towards those kinds of novels, and so I find my inspiration does change depending on what I
that is
need.
weird. Yeah.
And But and so I have my all-time favorites and sort of current inspirations or books that are helping me develop my thinking a little bit more expansively.
Yeah, that's nice actually, because I suppose when you think about it, like every book that you write is kind of different in a way to another one, and you're going to have kind of things that different kind of influences, I suppose, for each work. Um,
Yeah.
but back to disappoint me, I think I kind of touched on it maybe at the beginning, but what I love about your writing is that your characters are always so realized and they're like so um, human, and they're not great,
Thank you.
perfect people. Max and Vincent, I think, are perfect examples. I think they're really great characters and they're incredibly realized, and they really push the novel forward. And you feel kind of sort of every emotion with them as they go, but also at times they're really unlikable. And I wondered, did you have a tough time kind of getting your head around their voice and their sort of character, even though they were unlikable?
I think I would struggle more if a character wasn't
Hmm.
unlikable. I don't know if that's a reflection of my own likability, but I find that um, it's really hard to write likable characters when you're writing in first
Yeah.
person, and even more than that, first person present tense, which all of the book is written in. And it's when you're exposing, I mean, haven't we all had that moment where we've thought, like, oh, if people knew the things I thought sometimes, I'd have no
Yeah.
friends?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
I think we all have that kind of judgmental voice inside of us. And when I'm writing or inhabiting the minds of my characters, I try to think in the same way that they do, or think what might be going through their brain, and therefore the unlikability actually maybe comes a bit too easily because of that. And I don't think it stops me from enjoying writing them. I think it, if anything, just makes me want to embark on the maybe more difficult project of giving greater context to their pain
Hmm.
and for why they might feel certain things or think certain things. I think with Max, for example, it's pretty clear that her strong sense of judgment is equally weighted with a strong sense of self criticism. And, with Vincent, he's also he's an 18-year-old boy in the chapters where we first meet him. Of course, he's, in his 30s by the time by the time he meets Max. But when we go back to 2012, he's 19 and he's subject to a lot of the shame that men that age feel, or anyone who's 19
Yeah.
feels. The hypersensitive sense of embarrassment that you're also subject to at that age, and that produces in him thoughts and anxieties and which are inherently unflattering. And so I think, when you're writing, or when I'm writing, all I want to do is write characters with a sense of integrity. And I think with that comes a sense of real honesty about how they might think. And so I find myself almost quite unwilling to censor their unlikability, because I think that's just part of human nature. And what you maybe witness in the book is the way in which they have certain, each character has certain thoughts, but try to modulate it in their expression of them, or take some moments to reflect on those feelings as well. And so, I don't think I come down too hard on any of my characters for expressing unflattering thoughts, but I also similarly want to give them space to reflect and to have their thoughts challenged and their beliefs about themselves challenged as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think that is such like an important and brilliant way to approach writing a character. I think it's where you get the strongest characters from fiction. So cool. Yeah, it's really nice to hear you talking about your characters like that.
Thank you.
And I guess I know you were saying about the last year being crazy and like not really getting a chance to like let everything sink in. But I also wondered like what did you kind of find with when it was writing when you were coming to writing and like the publication of Bellies, like what when you were turning your head towards disappoint me, like what were you kind of being like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do now after what I know now and what I'm not gonna do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so like what lessons was I taking
Yeah, I know you
forward?
probably wrote. I think you mentioned you might have wrote "Disappoint Me" before Bellies came out, so maybe less about the publication and more about like the writing of like finishing and crafting an entire novel from start to finish. So what did you kind of take away from Bellies that you brought with you, and then you also decided to like leave behind when it came to your
Absolutely. So I wanted to write something which I felt was a tighter novel. So Disappoint Me, I think is maybe 20% shorter than
right? Okay,
Bellies, or 20,000 words shorter than Bellies if we're talking in really rough terms. And I wanted to write something that felt like really well paced and that felt short and communicated things in few use no more words than it needed. And I think when I was reflecting on Bellies, I was like, "Oh, I feel like I could have been a bit snappier with some of this, or and I really wanted to write a novel that fixed some of the pacing issues that I found with when I reflected on Bellies. And I think this it's an example of I don't think if I was given way more time with Bellies that I would have been able to do a better job with it. I think it's these things come down
of
to
course, yeah.
experience and giving yourself reflection after a piece of work is done. And so it's something I really wanted to roll forward into, write a tighter novel. And I also wanted to write a novel that felt a bit more mature.
Mm,
I think Bellies is very tied to that nostalgia of being in your early 20s. Whereas and for me, I started writing Bellies when I was 26. And so that was sort of in the middle of COVID. And I was really reflecting on my early 20s. And it was a very retrospective exercise. I think Disappoint Me is sort of the opposite of that. I started writing it when I was 27, 28, and I was very much looking into the future and thinking, okay, well, what might my
yeah,
life look like when I'm 30? What other things I might desire? What are the problems I might be facing? And, that ranges everything from, what do I want from a relationship and what kind of, to what extent, what do I want to sort of leave and take from heteronormativity? And all of these problems that I was wrestling with in the present and imagining I would wrestle with in the future, I wanted to sort of capture uh, within the novel. And I think the result is I haven't written a book that feels particularly nostalgic, but feels maybe more relevant to people who are my age.
hmm,
We're not looking back and be like, oh yeah, university was great. It's more of like, oh yeah, this I really relate to what these characters are wrestling with. And I as a result, I do think I maybe have written, I mean, I can't be the final judge of that, I guess, but I do think I've written a novel which feels more mature in
I can vouch
content.
for that. I totally think you have. Yeah, for sure. Let me be the one to say that. I definitely think if Disappoint Me feels almost like an older sort of mature version of Bellies. And I think everything that you kind of went to attempt to do at Disappoint Me, I think you've really achieved. Honestly, I think it's a banger of a novel.
Thank you.
And I guess one last question before we finish up is, I'm really looking forward to the 2025 publishing year ahead. I feel like there's so many amazing books coming out. Is there any one or two in particular that you're yourself excited for?
So I think within maybe a week or two of Disappoint Me being published, two books, one called So Thrilled for You
Yeah.
by Holly Bourne, and then The Lamb by Lucy
Mm,
Rose. I haven't read yet, and I'm really excited to be able to read. There are some other books that I've read already that are coming out this year, which are so great. Love and Exile by Sean
so
Fay,
excited for that one. I'm so
Fundamentally by Nusaiba
that is
Yunus,
hilarious, right? That is.
and then another book called Nova Scotia House by Charlie
Just finished
Porter.
that this morning.
Oh my!
It
Oh,
destroyed
did you
me.
did you
It
cry?
destroyed me. It destroyed me. Oh my god.
I destroyed it too. I didn't expect it to. I found it
No.
such a nice mixture of sort of experimental prose, but yet still very human. And I think he sort of straddled a line, which I think is very difficult. And
Very
I
difficult.
um,
Yeah.
really admired it. And I'm currently reading a book called Palm Meridian
Okay.
by Grace Flahive, which is about it's mostly set in 2070, and it's about a lesbian retirement community in Florida.
Amazing.
It's really
Oh my
good.
god, that sounds incredible.
So I think it's yeah, we've got such a fun year
Yeah.
ahead, and I'm oh, of course, and Han Kang's new book, that I'm really excited for.
Yeah.
But I yeah, there's such an exciting year ahead in publishing, and I'm really happy to be a part of
You're
it.
one of the members on the roster.
But I think, that part of it is with the anxiety of having a book come out. I've almost been kind of unable to pay too much attention to the other books around me, and so I'm excited for the dust to settle on Disappoint Me and to sort of start reading more new
Yeah.
books again.
Okay, amazing. Well, listen, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Yeah, I'm just such a big fan, and it's really nice to hear you talk about. It's always nice to hear authors talk about their own work, but yeah, you kind of approach it with such intelligence and clarity, and yeah, I think this
Thank
was
you.
such a great conversation. Disappoint Me is going to be out this week, and I can't wait for everybody to get their hands on it and read it. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and you all must simply read it. Thank you so much, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Ross.